This is gonna be the ultimate snob project, the best of everything I know of in fiction. Consider it my ultimate list of recommendations thus far. I will be going over the mediums you see here per year starting from the 1950s. I will be stating what stands out the most on each year and what I liked among them. If something is not mentioned, it's because I either don't know about it or don't care enough to mention it. Now, starting with the 1950s, things are very simple, there is not much of anything coming out yet. The only standout film from 1951 is Alice in Wonderland, which is wonderful to watch for the pretty colors and for the random stuff that keep happening, but it's terrible for pretty much everything else. There is no point in this movie, it's just random stuff happening. That, by the way, was the main source of inspiration for the author of the book. Everything in modern mathematics was so weird, he wanted to express his confusion through a fairy tale where nothing makes sense. I don't think anyone would care about it nowadays, especially when something like Adventure Time is just as chaotic and much longer to get used to its randomness. From books, this is where Asimov's Foundation begins. It's supposed to be one of the most thought-provoking sci-fi franchises, but pretty much like everything else back then, it's a completely dry read. Asimov spent most of his career writing like an emotionless robot and analyzing AI behavior based on simple programming. When you read this, it comes off as a bunch of snobs talking about how smart they are and how nobody gets them and how women are dumb. Yes, this is technically me. And by extension, every dork who is smart and not appreciated and wants to read something that makes him feel smart. None of that excuses the completely dry plot and flat characters. It's just a cool idea about psycho-history that appeals more to antisocial nerds than something the masses can appreciate for its plot or cast. There is a TV adaptation of it, and despite fleshing out the plot and the characters, it is still very dry and doesn't have much appeal. So yes, it's basically unsalvageable no matter what you do with it. Another notable book is Catcher in the Rye, where I was bored out of my mind reading it. And that was the point, it's about the protagonist being bored out of his mind because he lives a simple life in a peaceful society. It was thought-provoking at the time because it bothered to show how it feels like to be a bored teenager. Something with mass appeal among young people, but not something that can keep you interested for long. Also, isn't this the most typical premise of any power fantasy or escapism type of story nowadays? My life is boring and then something happens, so it won't be boring anymore. Now that's exciting. Why do I need a whole book to keep telling me I am bored instead of doing something that will entertain me? Partially this is shown in the book as well. Holden keeps doing nonsense just to break the monotony. Still not enough to excuse the duration and why I don't like this book. Now about the rest of the mediums, I won't mention anything, not in this here or most others. There is simply not much going on yet in terms of TV series. It's mostly cozy sitcoms and variety shows. I will only mention one later on as an exception. From manga, the only titles I recognize throughout the decade are from Osamu Tezuka, most of which got adapted in the 60s. Don't expect any mention of them, they are the usual titles all of us have heard about and never actually read because of the art style. No disrespect for Tezuka's work, he definitely kickstarted long-form anime as a medium and his stories had dark themes despite being cute looking, but at this point there's nothing that hasn't been improved by later titles. Speaking of anime, there is nothing worth mentioning in this decade either. After the war there was simply nothing noteworthy until Tezuka began making his adaptations in the 60s. Comics, I was not impressed by anything this decade, I will only mention one title from a later year. From cartoon series there are none yet, just the cinema shorts coming out irregularly, the most famous of which are the Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry. They began before the 50s and ended in the late 60s, so I only mention them in passage just for always being there. They have amazing animation and they don't last long, thus becoming perfect for the goldfish memory most people have nowadays because of TikTok shorts. Finally, there cannot be video game mentions because there are no video games yet. They came into existence in the 60s and weren't found in arcades before the 70s. 1952 has one standout film, it's Ikiru, a social drama about a dying old man who wants to spend his last days by doing something meaningful for his society. It also has some satire about how unemotional people can be when they don't care about others and just mind their business. It's a fine movie for what it's going for, but it doesn't have that many memorable scenes to excuse its duration. A notable book is The Old Man and the Sea. Can we all agree the only reason this book is popular is because Hemingway wrote it? It's as basic as it gets, it's just a guy fishing and fending off sharks as he returns to the shore. But because a famous guy wrote it and everyone was overanalyzing its basic themes, we are supposed to consider it an all-time classic. Fuck this noise. From movies, 1953 has Disney's Peter Pan, which is a perfectly fine family-friendly fantasy adventure. I used to like it a lot as a kid, and I even read the book it's based on. Nowadays I am not fond of it, since it's basically a kid-friendly isekai. All about escapism from the mundane, thus automatically better than Catcher in the Rye, and also about not wanting to ever grow up. That didn't age very well, considering how much more childish and immature people have become. From books, Fahrenheit 451 came out this year, which, along with 1984 and Brave New World, became the blueprint of dystopias that everyone copies ever since. Its plot and themes are fairly simple by today's standards, so it's not a must-read anymore. But I do have to point out how there is no such thing as a trashy book or a good TV show in this story. Like, only the best of the best stories could ever exist as books, and only the worst imaginable trash could ever be shown on television, which of course is not true. Have you seen what kind of books sell the most these days? 1954 has 4 movies that stand out. 2 of them are from Japan. The original Godzilla, which is an in-your-face anti-war and pro-ecology kaiju movie, and also the one that inspired thousands of other stories about giant robots and monsters destroying cities. It does what it's supposed to, and unlike most of whatever was made after it, it's not mindless action about dinosaurs fighting robots or some shit. It's also very basic by today's standards, so not a must-watch. The other film is The Seven Samurai, which is also very basic in plot. It's just a bunch of warriors defending a village from bandits. But because it's so long and it spends so much time on fleshing out its main characters without ever becoming absurd with its action, it's actually pretty damn good as an experience. Is it that memorable to enter my favorites? No. The third movie is Hitchcock's Rear Window, which has amazing cinematography. It's a great example of how to show most things without the need for someone to infodump it for a dumb watcher who can't look away from his smartphone for more than a minute. But that aside, it has the same issues as all Hitchcock films. The plots are never that interesting and the actors have this woody performance like they don't know how to emote. It comes off as mechanical after a while, especially when you compare it to the Japanese films of the same year. As such, I recommend it, but doesn't make it into my tops. And now the 4th movie that did make it into my tops. It's Animal Farm, the most famous in-your-face anti-communism cartoon of all times. Yes, it is superficial, yes, it is silly. It's also the most effective way to show to people why communism is bullshit. I don't know of a cartoon movie doing a better job so effortlessly, while still being safe for children. So basically it's the oldest cartoon that makes it into my favorites, because there is nothing that ever topped it in this regard. From standout books there is Lord of the Flies, which shows what happens when the left gets what it wants. If you have a society without laws or morality or shame, you end up with a bunch of savages who worship demons. Animal Farm makes fun of communism, The Lord of the Flies makes fun of the leftists. I love it! It goes into my tops, even if it's not a fun book to read. What I did have fun reading is the other standout book of this year, which is also about a lord of something. It's The Lord of the Rings, the best fantasy trilogy of all times. Most out there prefer the Game of Thrones because it's just sex and senseless gore. But how many years have they been waiting for the next book, eh? Is the plot ever going to be completed, eh? Now, to be honest, it's not a flawless story. The descriptions can be too long at times. Tom Bombadil was complete filler, the giant eagles were a plot armor, and Gandalf coming back from the dead was needless. But since there is no fantasy story with fewer issues, it remains in my tops. 1955 is almost entirely empty. I could only find one notable book, which is Lolita. I cannot speak about it because I didn't read it. I only watched the 2 movie adaptations, which I found to be fine, and thus have no interest in reading the book. 1956 only has a spectacle movies, as I call them. Fun to watch them for the spectacle, but nothing special as a whole. 1957 has 2 good spectacle war dramas, and The Seventh Seal, a Russian slow-burning psychological drama about mortality. But more importantly, it has 12 Angry Men, a movie that shouldn't normally be in my favorites, but because online discourse is complete garbage nowadays, it ends up being something everybody should watch. It's just people talking in a single room for 2 hours, which sounds completely boring, but the point is that they need to be sure someone is guilty of murder. And as it turns out, nobody's sure because they were just going by their personal biases. It comes down to a basic debate where all you have to do to win is to prove the evidence can be disproven. And as it turns out, it can, and nobody can substantiate his opinion correctly. This very basic premise is something almost nobody does these days. Everyone is just following his biases and ignores evidence, which is why we have endless internet drama and terrible political propaganda. And that's why I love this movie. It's part of what inspired me to make videos that debunk the fanboys as well. This is also the year when a mindfuck comic called El Eternauta began being published in Argentina. It began as an environmental disaster, then it became about an alien invasion, and then it had some indirect political messages that the dictatorship didn't like and executed the writer. It's not a high recommendation since it does eventually become about time reset bullshit, but as a whole it's the only comic with partial plot continuity I know of from the 50s, which was that experimental and that influential, they ended up executing people because of it. And yes, there is also a TV adaptation of it, that's how I found out about it. 1958 has another Hitchcock film, if you like a good cinematography and don't mind the woody acting, and another Japanese epic that lasts twice as much as it should. 1959 has Ben-Hur, a well-made historical epic, The Sleeping Beauty for those who like well-animated fairy tales, and The Twilight Zone, the oldest mindfuck series that many still like today and for which I don't care about because it's just episodic shock factor. Also, the Starship Troopers were published in this year, and like all retro sci-fi books, it was very dry and tiresome to read. The movie adaptation, on the other hand, was amazing. And finally, 1960 has a lot of spectacle movies. The OG time travel movie everybody copies to this day, just to remind us why time paradoxes are bad writing. The remake of The Seven Samurai in the Wild West, a patriotic movie for the true Americans, another Hitchcock thriller, and a manly Greek doing manly things in the name of freedom! This year is when the Flintstones began airing, a cartoon series I always liked for how creative it was when it came to using dinosaurs instead of technology. Yes, it's a huge downgrade compared to the Looney Tunes, but it's also historically important because we see the transition from highly detailed animation shorts on large cinema screens to cheap animation for tiny TV screens where the only things that move are the head and the feet. Cutting corners and going for quantity over quality began being the name of the game, something even Tezuka did in his adaptations. Finally, this year is when To Kill a Mockingbird was published and became a classic for its anti-racism themes. Like so many classics, it's very basic in its theme exploration and even scatterbrained at times, since the parts that involve a shut-in boy have nothing to do with the core themes. Once again, it's something that is not a must-read anymore. And that's it with the 1950s and all the standouts I know of. The best year was clearly 1954, the worst one was 1955. Next time I will go over the 60s where anime and video games enter the competition.